Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just wanted to give you very, very quickly update. As I mentioned last time, our TCC vaccine site is no longer. We've shut that down. We are understanding from our partners at TMC that the Udall site will be shut down as of June 30. So that information was sent out. Again, can't overstate the appreciation that we have for our partnerships with Pima County, TMC, ASU, and a variety of others that have helped get the community vaccinated. Rather than try to list for you the pop-up sites, Mayor and members of the council, what I thought I'd do is just give you the website where folks can go to learn about the pop-up sites. It is it's part of the pimacounty.gov portal. What we'll do, Mayor, it's probably easier than trying to read it. We'll post it on the chat, and then we'll also make sure that you have it available. I believe it was sent in some of the materials that were sent out yesterday, but we'd be happy to make sure that you all have that available. Also wanted to just let you know we did submit money and been watching our FEMA reimbursement for some of the COVID expenses. We currently have almost 9.8 million, 9.75 to be exact, in for reimbursement. About 4.6 of that is part of the CRF discussions that we've had several times now. So we're very patiently and eagerly awaiting a decision on that, but I did want to let the council know that. Mayor, happy to answer any questions on this item. I do have staff available. I know that Councilmember Fimbres had some questions about evictions, and I know that Liz Morales is on. So Councilmember Fimbres, if you'd like to cover it here, happy to try to answer your questions. I know you had expressed concerns over the eviction, the eviction moratorium ending here at the end of the month.
Before we move into that piece of this item, I just want to make sure that we, the City of Tucson, make available any information or website pertaining to vaccination sites. So if we could even share the Pima County web address in our main page at the City of Tucson website, our population to get vaccinated. There is a Delta variant that has been found in Pima County, as well as cities throughout the country. And it would be a shame if we were to see the numbers of COVID-19 going up. And so we really have to encourage our residents as much as we possibly can to get vaccinated, that we are not out of the woods yet. There could, there's other variants in the United States that are very, very aggressive. And so we have to make sure that, that we control as much as we possibly can, and we encourage our community to get vaccinated. It's so easy. People don't need to worry about appointments. They can just go into the Pima County website, take a look at where they're offering pop-up services, or even pharmacies that are offering the vaccine for free. So I just don't want us to forget that COVID-19 is still alive and well throughout our country, and that there are variants now in Pima County, like the Delta variant, that is very, very aggressive. So if we could do that, Mr. Manager, just to, promote vaccinations and the availability of vaccines in our community, that would be great, on our social media sites and on our website. So with that, I'll just pass it over to Councilmember Fimbres to bring up his concerns.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Define the affordable and stable housing further in detail, Liz, can you? And then how can ARPA funds be used to deal with eviction prevention?
Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Fimbres, for that question. You know, housing stability is really critical. When you look at housing instability, those are families that tend to have multiple moves of not of their choosing. They lack the financial stability. I apologize for that. The financial stability to ensure that they have enough funds to pay for rent and housing costs. So housing stability is really ensuring that families and individuals have the housing of their own choosing, they move at their own choosing, and that they can afford not just their housing costs, but the other necessary costs to have a stable household, employment, benefits, that type of thing.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, you asked about ARPA funds, what can be used?
Yes.
I know that the city manager will be covering ARPA funds in one of the next items, but I will say that there's the funding we've received from the Department of Treasury to provide rental assistance at this point is sufficient to cover the amount of applications we've received to date. So, you know, I'm pretty confident we will, you know, with the need that we have seen so far, we are able to cover that with the funding we've received.
Okay.
Liz, I just wanted to follow up on Councilmember Fimbres' question. I know that we are working in partnership with Pima County for eviction prevention and utility, rent, and mortgage assistance. Can you talk to us about numbers that we have received from the federal government to be put into this effort, both Pima County and City of Tucson?
Yes, Mayor. You know, we've received the initial tranche of funding was $19 million just for City of Tucson. We received an additional $13 million in the second round. Again, we are putting our funds together with Pima County so that those funds exceed, the first round was exceeding $30 million. So it will be even more with the second round. And so, you know, right now we have expended over $9 million to nearly 1,600 households. And the amount of funding that we're providing is substantial to each household. They average around $6,000 a household because we can do the past 12 months and 3 months forward. So it really ensures stability for the family. And so the good positive news is we've been having the housing resource fairs with the constables. We've seen an increase in the last 2 weeks of applications as a result of those efforts. And so the word is getting out. We need to continue to ensure that people know that the funding is there. We need to ask landlords to be patient, to work with their tenants and know that the funding is there. So we really want to encourage our landlords to apply if they want to on behalf of their tenants, that is an option. But the funding is ample at this point based on the number of applications. If we get more applications, I believe we still have ample funding to serve the need here in Pima and Tucson.
So it's not necessary, as I hear you, it's not necessary to use the American Rescue Plan dollars in the $67 million tranche, this first tranche that we received, because we have plenty of funds for eviction prevention.
Mayor, that is my opinion based on the numbers, and what we're seeing is the average assistance per household.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, Liz, how are we getting the message out about this to the tenants and to the landlords and everybody else? What's our process?
Yeah. So, Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, there's been a lot of efforts. We're very grateful to our media. Our TV has news media has provided a couple of great stories on this. We've also what we're hearing from a lot of those who are being served that they heard about it through the radio. So continuing to utilize our radio and TV ads as much as we can. I think we want to increase that as much as possible between now and even though June 30th is the moratorium, I think there's the time that it takes landlords to go back, because what I understand and have learned that landlords, even if they had already had an eviction filed and the constables are holding on to it, they have to go back to court to refile and then get a writ of restitution, which means they also have to wait 5 days. So we have time past June 30th to get the messaging out. We also have substantial work on websites, social media, through our city social media, and then and our websites are very informative. Both the City of Tucson and Pima County, when it comes to eviction prevention, our websites have substantial information for both tenants and landlords. The Community Investment Corporation website has a landlord page of information, as well as the tenant has a page for themselves. CIC, Community Investment Corporation, is sending out messages every 2 weeks to tenants that have applied. They sent out a message last week and this Friday to landlords. There's about over 600 landlords that have opted in to get messages. So we're sending out messages about the assistance and continued requesting their patience as we get through all the applications. And lastly, AMA, Arizona Multi-Housing Association, has been very helpful in getting messages out to their members about the resources that we have. So we will not let up on this campaign of information to ensure people have that. I mentioned the Housing Resource Fair, and I know Ward 1 is working and the mayor's office on a resource fair this week. Those have proven to be very informative.
Ward 5 is also, Liz.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Ward 5 is included in that. And that resource fair, the ones that have already happened in the past have brought a lot of applicants. And so I'm so happy that that our mayor and council is supporting that effort to continue to get the word out. And what I learned also is that the courts are referring people to the constable social worker, Nadine Jacobo, and she is very helpful in connecting people to these resources as well. So wherever people are showing up, we're making sure they get that information.
And this is out in English, Espanol?
Está en español también, yes.
Good. And then what are we doing with the outreach of, because everybody says go to our website, but a lot of people don't have computers. They're monolingual. They work off landlines still.
Yes.
How are we getting that message out to them?
So, again, I think many of those, it's going to be word of mouth and showing up to the courts. And again, the constables, as they're going door to door, as they'll be able to help those who are really limited on information. But there is a phone number for anyone who wants to call. It's 831-292-4308. And that's the number anyone could call. They can get assistance in English and Spanish to apply.
Can you repeat that again, Liz?
Yes, the number is 831-292-4308.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Now, Madam Mayor, I was wondering if we could make a motion to extend the moratorium from June 30th to December. Is that possible?
Councilmember, I think that we can extend our own, the City of Tucson.
That's what I'm saying, for the City of Tucson. Madam Mayor, to direct the city manager to direct staff to come back with an extension of a moratorium to prevent eviction within Tucson city limits be effective until December 31st, 2021. That's my motion.
Alrighty, and this is within our own properties, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Okay. Do you need that in the form of a motion, Mr. Ortega, or just direction is fine?
Mayor, I think a motion would be appropriate. It is a policy decision. We can certainly implement. I'm not sure of all the logistics of that, but given direction today, then we can start implementing it immediately. And if there's some formal action needs to be taken to ratify that, I can bring it back. But we will move based on a motion and direction from a policy level. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
So that was a form of a motion, Madam Mayor. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Righty, so there's a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion or questions?
I have questions.
Sure.
My first question, is our social media including Twitter and Instagram?
Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, I believe it's Twitter. Because I follow, so I know it's on Twitter.
I didn't see anything come across the Twitter, and I would retweet it. And
okay.
So I just want to be sure that we're hitting Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Those seem to be very popular social media mediums at this point. So I just want to make sure we're doing that. The second question I have is, what about housing starts? Are we allowed to use any of this money for housing starts? In the direct social work capacity, social workers who, because of the reopening, are working with folks who have gone back to work and they're still living houseless. They have no place to, they have no shelter, and they're actually back to work. And I was wondering if we have any program we can run which can include housing starts.
Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to include that. When you say starts, I assume you mean move-in cost. Am I correct?
Well, I mean, everybody knows that they've been evicted and they've been on the streets or whatever. Just to get back on your feet, sometimes you can opt into shelter. Some folks don't feel safe in different shelters. I mean, there's all kinds of different reasons. But the bottom line is, I know of one person specifically, and I know there's more that are literally still on the street, but they are working. And I have one case that's a shining example of this right now. I'm trying to figure out how we can help this person now that they are just trying to, put in their time, put their life back together, and be able to see their kids, and they can't even get a place to stay. And I want to know what kind of assistance we have for that.
So under the U.S. Department of Treasury, we can also use it to assist with move-in costs, security deposits, and 3 months of rent going forward. CIC has subcontracted with Primavera for these funds that we've given to CIC to operate this program. And so I'm happy, Councilmember Cunningham, if you want to share that information, I can make sure that that individual is connected. But anyone who's looking for that can be can go directly to Primavera. I'm not sure if they have all the infrastructure yet for that program, but that was meant for them to get started very quickly. For those who are displaced, what we found is some landlords don't want to work with our emergency rental assistance program. So what we're doing is we're referring them to Primavera to get them housed. Now, there is going to be difficulty with people with evictions on their record, but that will be a challenge. But hopefully landlords.
We're trying to do all this help for folks, and the deck's still stacked against them. It's kind of frustrating. The deal with this is that when you say we're reaching out to our landlords who don't want to work with the eviction process, do those landlords have Section 8 contracts with us? Because maybe they should.
We have not made that connection, but that is something we can look into and find out if they are also participating with the program.
They're participating in programs in which they're getting pass-through money from us, but they don't want to participate in other programs that are vital to the quality of life of our citizenry. Then maybe they shouldn't be in business with us. My next question is for Councilmember Fimbers. I need clarification. Do you mean a moratorium for all landlords in the city of Tucson, or the properties that we operate?
You want to say that one more time?
I said, do you mean a moratorium for all the landlords in the city, or just the properties the city of Tucson operates?
The ones we're operating, we have control over. City of Tucson.
All right, so not private landlords, just the moratorium for our own?
No, we would hope they would come on board with us.
Okay, I'm in favor of that. That's a good idea.
Councilmember Santa Cruz.
Thank you, Mayor. Liz, I was wondering, I know in conversations that we've had in the past, you were coming up with a plan for what to do with, the city properties. And so I know at the end of the day, somebody's still, paying the bill. So are we thinking that monies would come out of ARP or CDBG funds to pay for this, or what are we thinking here?
Mayor, Councilmember Santa Cruz, the funding that we have for the properties that we have, one is a two properties that we have here online soon. It will need some funding from ARPA to help with the maintenance and operations of those new properties. And so that is one of the requests to ensure that those properties are being operated. But they are being purchased with CDBG CARES funds and also the home ARPA funds that we have been allocated to purchase those properties.
I'm talking specific to the other properties that we're doing the moratorium for.
Oh, okay.
Are we paying for that, or what's the plan?
I appreciate that. Thank you for that clarification. So what happens is we get operating subsidy from HUD. So when we lose the tenant revenue, that we don't have a way to replace that. So we just, as you'll see in the PHA meeting, our financials on the AMPs do tend to take a hit when tenant revenue is down. So that is, there's not a funding source to replace that.
Are you anything then? Like, are we going to have to allocate funding towards this?
Again, on the units that we own in which the rents aren't paid, we're still sustaining those even with the loss of tenant revenue. We typically don't supplement federal funds on top of federal funds for those units, but definitely can explore that if that's what you're asking for.
Mayor, Councilmember Santa Cruz, maybe I can help a little bit. So once we understand the potential impact, because right now we have pro forma that show we can sustain most all of it using our reserves and using some of our HUD money. Should we fall short, or at least our pro forma show that we're going to fall short, what we would do is bring it back to you for consideration as soon as we know that. So we had anticipated that this might be the direction, so we are prepared to implement immediately. The longer term impact, say in the November, December timeframe, we'll have to make sure that we have adequate reserves. I think, council member, that's your point. And at this point, we look like we're okay, but we don't know how many folks this might impact and what impact it would have on our cash flow. So we'll bring back a recommendation if it's different than what we've outlined for you here.
Councilmember Kozachik?
Yeah, to that point, just a week or so ago when we met with the constables and Liz's office, the message was we were more concerned that we'd run out of time before we ran out of money. So you've staffed up on that. But also during our last meeting, I believe, Rahina, you mentioned that there's another tranche of federal dollars that may be coming to supplement the city county 31 million. Is that still potential, likely?
Yes, there is a potential for additional ARP, HUD, CDBG, additional funds than what we receive so far. So yes.
Cool.
Yeah. And that informs our conversation, our next conversation, which is the American Rescue Plan conversation that we're going to have. But any other questions or comments? Alrighty, so there's a motion on the floor. There's a second to continue our eviction moratorium until December of this year, December 2021. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Alrighty, anything else on this particular item, Mr. Manager?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Alrighty, good. Perfect. We move on to the second item on study today. Item 2, staff has an update on the American Rescue Plan. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and members of the council. So this is really, I'll call it an introduction to the American Rescue Plan. You're going to hear us refer to it as ARP. It's just a little easier and simpler to abbreviate. The key thing today is that we are not looking really for direction. It's to introduce it. Certainly, you're welcome to give us thoughts and comments and direction if that is what you choose. But this will be an ongoing conversation, Mayor and members of the council. We expect that the final, well, let me rephrase that. more guidance will come when the comment period ends July 12th. Initially, we thought that we might get guidance on July 12th, the final guidance. And I think that the terminology that we used in the memo is interim final guidance, because that's the way that they refer to it. But I just, again, wanted to let you know that, we're keeping a very close eye on it. Quick shout out to Andrew Greenhill, who's he and Tracy Tucker have been watching this very, very closely and working with us to make sure that we have up to the minute information. So what you see today is a snapshot of what we know. Mayor, Councilmember Ulick, and Councilmember Santa Cruz, we have incorporated your thoughts that were attached as a part of last meeting's agenda materials. And so we wanted to go over it with you and then, solicit some thoughts from you. We'll have plenty of discussion on this. I suspect it'll probably be a standing item, much like the COVID item, for several months yet until we have the final guidance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liana Perez, and then Jeff Yates will follow Liana. So Liana.
Thank you, Mr. Ortega. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council members. As Mr. Ortega said, this is just a layout of a possible framework for the spending or use of the ARP monies, and to begin the dialogue as how we go forward with this. We know this is going to be a completely collaborative process in its development, and we have a ways to go. The slides we're going to cover with you this afternoon are really more kind of as a reminder to you of where we've been with the CARES Act, and kind of we will also point out maybe some of the differences between the CARE funding and the ARP funding for as you consider possible elements and possible uses, authorized uses, basically under the rules and guidelines that we know them as of today. So we're going to cover the mayor and council priorities, the investments we've made in the community with the CARES Act. We're going to cover the eligible use categories of the ARP, and also the designing of a strategic approach for these dollars. And Jeff is controlling my slides. So next slide, Jeff. So just kind of a review of mayor and council priorities that we've made as a result of the Jeff, I think you went one too many. Back one. No, I guess you were fine. So reviewing the mayor and council priorities with respect to, as we worked on these, the proposed framework, we wanted to go back and revisit mayor and council priorities as they were established in the development of the FY 2021 budget. And we know that those priorities were climate action and resiliency, economic opportunities, safer community, enhanced government services, and the employee-centric focus. So we started with those priorities in mind because we wanted to ensure that as we were building out this possible framework, we were looking at ways in which these priorities could align with what we were thinking about with the proposed framework. So next slide, please. So as we know, the CARES Act provided funds for immediate support and relief to the community from the devastations of and impacts of COVID-19. The mayor and council strategically developed and deployed funding through partnerships with the community, intergovernmental relationships, and through direct city services as we utilized the CARES Act funding. Next slide. And just as a reminder, with respect to the amounts that were actually spent on the investments in the community under the CARES Act, before I go to this slide, but as a reminder for mayor and council, under the CARES funding was focused on meeting the needs of the communities most vulnerable during that time. Just an example, we spent $51.6 million in community investment and support in the form of small business grants, rent and utility assistance, food delivery. $41.1 million was spent in the continuity of city operations and services. That included PP&E, cleaning, sanitizing, telework solutions, additional fire rescue units, employee testing, and contact tracing. And $2.8 million was spent in other support, such as small business assistance, support of the Southern Arizona Food Bank, EMS, public safety, community outreach, and employee support. So the ARP actually provides, different from the CARES Act, the ARP provides a substantial infusion of resources to meet pandemic response needs to rebuild a stronger and more equitable economy as the country and our local economy continue to recover. So the ARP dollars can be used, as Ms. Ortega mentioned, there's the interim rules. There are over 100 and some pages, but in some of the sessions that I've sat in with the League of some of the governors' meetings, I mean the major mayors' meetings with respect to how some of these funds are going to be utilized and ideas in other parts of the country, it's very obvious that we are being encouraged, and some of the suggestions are to utilize these funding sources to leverage other funding sources. In other words, knowing that our county, local counties are also getting additional funding, and the best way to leverage and make most efficiencies out of that funding. Leveraging with business partners, nonprofits, profits, to be as transformative as we can with these dollars. So the federal framework actually consists of, we've already received $67 million in the first round of funding, 67 and change, so to speak. And there's that potential for the second round of funding next year, which would be the equivalent. So we got half this year and half next year. In addition to the direct funding that we receive, Pima Counties is receiving over $203 million in funding in ARP funding. And we also know that 36 million was provided separately through HUD to Housing and Community Service, our Housing and Community Development Office. So we've reviewed the various categories for eligible uses under the Treasury rules, and these are the basic categories here, and they are responding to the public health emergency. That would include providing assistance for the negative economic impacts of COVID. So assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or to aid particular industries that were most impacted by COVID, such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. We also have there's also a category for pandemic related personnel to reimburse for those salaries for personnel that are considered essential workers during the pandemic. There's also a very important category for us which is the revenue recovery, and there's a particular, Jeff can explain it when he goes through his slides, but we've actually already accounted for that because it's a calculation that is based on your revenues, lost revenues from prior years. And that particular amount, it's 12.25 million, has actually already been incorporated into the FY 2022 budget that you'll be considering later today for adoption. So we've already built in that revenue recovery dollar amount. And then there's also the other category of infrastructure. And in the infrastructure, the rules actually, and the guidance of the rules actually pretty much outline or pull out water, sewer, and broadband as a primary infrastructure uses. So we, as Mr. Ortega said, the rules
I'm sorry, I did not understand that.
So there is a category for infrastructure
So
investment.
infrastructure is water, sewer, and broadband, or not water, sewer, and broadband?
It is water, sewer, and broadband. I'm sorry. As the rules are today. And I know that there are comments being made with respect to maybe some modifications of the rules or expenditures in other ways that may be considered as well. So we'll need to see what the final rule is. The timelines. So as Mr. Ortega said, the deadline for the comments to the interim rules is July the 12th. The final rule won't come out till sometime after that. We don't expect the final rule to be more stringent. If anything, it may be more flexible. So hopefully, and we know that even if we come back, as Mr. Ortega says, this will be a standing item. As those rules get finalized, we may need to be recommending adjustments in different areas of these particular categories. Something to consider as well, and I know I've shared this with you, Mayor, that the monies, according to the rule, the way it is right now, the monies must be obligated by December 31st of 2024, and they must be performed. In other words, we must be complete with these projects or programs by December 31st of 2026. So we do have some actual guidelines on, when we have to commit to the funds and the use of the funds.
Yeah, can we get a breakdown on the money spent in like broadband and the water and the sewer, what has been dealt out and what the amounts were?
To date, you mean, so we haven't spent any of this money, any of this, we haven't, Councilmember Freeman, we haven't actually line item any amounts in here, but
it was CARES Act money.
We have invested in I'm sorry.
CARES Act funds.
Under the CARES Act, we can get that to you, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So now I'm going to actually turn it over to Jeff, who's going to go over some of the categories of possible uses for this fund with respect to what the outline, the memo that we received from the mayor and Councilmember Ulig, Councilmember Santa Cruz, as we went in and line item some suggested uses of the funding under those categories.
Great, thank you, Liana. And thank you, Mayor and Council. I think that the important part before we kind of delve into the detail is there are a couple of pieces I kind of want to start with. Is the idea that this differs from the CRF in that the CRF was largely designed as responsive to the immediate crisis, while the ARPA funds are designed to have that lasting, meaningful impact. So as we work through this discussion, some of the key themes that I think you'll see are the idea of transformative, meaningful projects that have a lasting impact in the community. While some are responsive to the immediate urgency, others are long-term in nature and will yield results over a window of time. We have until FY27 to perform some of these. Some of these programs will be, again, a little longer in nature. Some will be more immediate. But I just want you to kind of think through that, and then leveraging, as we've seen with the county's funding, they have a significant chunk of funding, as well as our HUD funding that comes through the HCD. So how we leverage all of those funds together will help the city and the county have that meaningful impact in the community. So I just wanted to go kind of start that discussion as we start down the road of discussing what these funds can be used for, what to do with them. In addition, this process, I think has been mentioned before, is informed by the memo received from Ward 1, Ward 3, and the mayor's office. So it's kind of structured around that. But today we're just kind of talking conceptually and not necessarily implementation strategy. So we have examples of types of projects that can be done. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Oh, sorry, I jumped one ahead. So when we look at this, what we're looking at are kind of essentially 7 categories: relief for families and essential workers, community reinvestment and recovery, workforce and youth development, investment in digital literacy, affordable and stable housing, which Liz talked a little bit earlier about, strategic reserves, which is where we could put where we started the conversation of the revenue recovery, and then some organizational needs. So in our process so far, what we have looked at is some of those things, those supplementals that were included in the budget, or that were not included in the budget, but are significant organizational needs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. So with that, relief for families and essential frontline workers. This could come in the form of small business grants, advertising programs, expansion of KidCo, I know is a very important one, career skills development and job pathing programs. So that includes the development of skilled labor, not just the traditional college path or something to that effect, and other community health and safety programs. And we haven't gone too far down the road of defining exactly what those look like, because I think that's where we want to touch base and kind of have that discussion and let you tell us as the council where you want to go with this framework. The next component then is the community reinvestment. These are things like support for the Arts Center, neighborhood streets programming. We have a significant investment in neighborhood streets already in the budget, but we could always do more. And that is part of the equity discussion and neighborhood improvement and so forth. Drinking fountain replacement throughout all of our parks, environmental improvement projects. So one of the things that the interim final rule told us was that they look more favorably upon eco-friendly or environmental projects that are sustainable and provide that environmental sustainability. Other recreational improvements and programming. So that could include additional parks, equipments, could include any number of things, could include additional recreational programming in areas of higher need. And then infrastructure reinvestment. And that could take the form of transit facilities, any number of things related to that. Our next component then is workforce and youth development. These include things like our comprehensive economic development strategy to kind of set us on a path. Again, the KidCo expansion can fit into this. Workforce development, partnering with the county and how we do that, and working with them, working with Pima Community College, even working with our own development as a city, trying to create a pipeline for labor in different high need categories that the city has. For instance, we have a challenge recruiting CDL. I'm sorry, was there a question?
Yes, working with how about some nonprofits like Job Path, Chicans por la Causa, Project PEP, some of those groups that work, CPLC.
Absolutely. I think that we can partner with any number of community agencies to go through this. And that when I say partnerships, and I apologize, Councilman, I don't know them all off the top of my head, but when I say partnerships, I mean also not the other non-governmental entities as well. So right now we kind of have this wide open approach that we can work down and kind of develop those partnerships with. So I think that that's, a place in our workforce and youth development to help those most impacted with the ARPA funds. And I think that that's part of the strategy going forward. Another area that we can look at is then the investment in digital literacy. And probably the biggest, and it can't be undersold, the biggest chunk of this is the wireless project and extending internet service to those places that have a challenge getting it. We also have some cybersecurity software and some organizational needs around digital literacy and the ability to connect to the city that we would recommend as part of that, maybe as part of that discussion. Certainly the ARPA includes that as part of that. So I think it's an important component. But continuing on down the road that the mayor and council have started, and we've heavily invested in with the CRF funds to continue that wireless program throughout the city. And I apologize, we're going a little slow today. Affordable and stable housing, affordable housing programs. I will describe what unhoused bio-waste cleanup means. So that is, in talking with Lara at Parks and Recreation, one of our challenges is keeping our park spaces clean and safe. So this is to allow cleanup and sanitation work at our parks from the folks that, the unhoused that are living in the parks. So this will help create that safe environment for them. And housing infrastructure investments, I think Liz alluded to earlier, the need for operational funds and other requirements. So this is a very broad category, and ARPA allows us a lot of space to work within this area. So I think as we go down this road, partnering with ACD, helping to leverage those funds, partnering with those NGOs and those other groups to try to maximize that, this is where we can see a lot of opportunity and a lot of place to work, and depending upon how we go down that road. So I think that that's just some examples. The next is going to be the strategic reserves. This is where we have our 12.25 million of reimbursement to the general fund. The revenue calculation yielded just over 14 million. So part of the process and the way that ARPA works is where we can prove revenue recovery, those funds have less restriction. So we'll do our magic on the finance side to get that money as unencumbered as possible to allow us to work and to achieve your goals. And those areas where they don't specifically fit within ARPA, we'll work to make them work, to make them fit through other categories. And revenue recovery will be a key player in that equation to allow us to do that. The next part and the final part is going to be organizational needs. So we've just identified a few organizational needs that we have. Probably to me, one of the most important ones, which is near and dear to my heart, is the organizational mental health program. Our employees, 4,000 plus, have experienced the same challenges the community has and served through. And we're seeing the next crisis coming is that mental health crisis. So we're talking about how we address that and how we provide them services, looking at website improvements to continue to improve our engagement with residents, and then some city infrastructure and renewal and replacement. So there are just some opportunities we have that we'll delve into further as we go along in this discussion of areas where we think that we can invest in city infrastructure to serve the public better. So with that, those are kind of the areas we looked at and had that discussion. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Mike, and Liana, and open up to any questions you guys that are the mayor and council may have. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the mayor, if I may,
Go ahead, Liana.
to answer your question about the amount expended under the CARES Act for broadband. To date, it's $13,295,600. And also to your point on partnering with other organizations and nonprofits, it's obvious that this is a substantial amount of funds in a period of time that we need to determine, the best use and the most transformative use of those funds. And of course, the capacity of us as an organization to carry out a lot of this is we are going to have to partner with, local community organizations and or organizations to be able to, to expend the funds in a timely fashion and efficient manner as well. So any questions?
Thank you so much, Liana. Appreciate your presentation as well as Jeff. Thank you for interpreting a very, very difficult program, as we very well know that all of these federal grants are complicated, and the American Rescue Plan Act is very similar, right? So the good thing is that we have the funds in the bank. We have the first tranche, which is about $67 million. We have an opportunity as a mayor and council of the city of Tucson to be able to put these funds into meaningful, transformative work and reinvestment back into our neighborhoods and our community, as well as our workers as City of Tucson employees. So the good thing as well is that we have the time to be able to create a thoughtful, strategic approach to investing these dollars back into our community. As Liana had described, we have until 2024 to allocate the funds, and then 2026 to expend them, if I'm correct. So with that, I'm going to open up for my colleagues for their thoughts and comments. Councilmember Kozachik?
You kind of just answered it. It was more looking at a process question. There's a quite an off ramp, quite a timeline for us to consider this. And so, whereas we had a real tight time frame with the CARES dollars, this one's much more considered. So either Mike or Liana, do you have a proposed sort of game plan for how we roll this out? I know you've got 12 million that you skimmed off the top, but what about the rest? And what's the plan for that?
Mayor, Councilmember Kozaczek, so a lot of it will depend on the final guidance, but I think it's important that we begin this process now and try to identify those pieces that are, I'll use the term no-brainers, that aren't going to change, because that way we can start moving quickly on those agreements. If you remember during the CRF discussions, one of the challenges was mobilizing the agreements and all of the stuff, if you will, that went along with that. In this particular instance, I think that we've already been down that path, so we have a pretty good handle on the infrastructure internally and externally that'll take to get those done. So very simplistically, we're hoping that we'll have guidance, I won't say final, guidance within the August timeframe. And in parallel to that, we've had at least 2 discussions with you to start to really hone in on what those dollars look like for some of these programs. So I'm hoping that we can have agreements back before you by September, assuming we get the guidance. If we get the guidance sooner, we'll move that date up. But at this point, on a schedule basis, I'm thinking we're probably looking at September before we're back in front of you with formal agreements. But I will be assuming that we're going to have continued discussion every meeting, Councilmember.
By formal agreements, you're not talking about performance agreements, like, for instance, that we had with the Y. But what do you mean? Because I'm sure all of us sitting here right now could give you 15 different community agencies that are deserving and needy. So what do you mean by agreements?
Sure. So Mayor, Councilmember Kozaczek, it's sort of like that, because keep in mind that it's not the ultimate receiver of those dollars. It's the mechanism that we use to get the dollars out. And so, for example, use the Y as a piece of that. So we would contract with the Y. That's the formal agreement. And the criteria for that would then get the dollars out the door. So the key piece to it is making sure that those agreements are ultimately following that federal language and that federal guidance. So those are the formal agreements that I'm talking about. The dollars rolling out would be subsequent to that. Now, obviously, it'll take us time to get those relationships in order. So those dollars could roll out this fall. We'll call them to the users. And so that's just very, very generally what I'm thinking in terms of timing, Councilman.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Council member, actually, Vice Mayor Lee is next.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to echo the comments about great job on putting all of this together and synthesizing this into a great presentation. I'm grateful for the opportunity that we have in front of us to be really thoughtful in how we approach this opportunity that's in front of us. One piece that I would love to see under the relief for families is working with our partners to address mental health needs in the community. Our community has sustained so much trauma through this pandemic. People have lost loved ones, have lost businesses, careers, and I would just love to see some investment in that space to partner with some organizations locally, if we could add that as we move forward in shaping what we're going to do. So thank you, Mayor. That's all I had.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. That is a very, very important piece of recovery for many in our community. So that's a great suggestion. Councilmember Cunningham.
I decided to put my creative thinking cap on with this program. I'm thinking about long-term energy costs for some of our needy families. How can we, and I'm just kind of spitballing here, I wonder if there's a way that we can do 2 things. One is we can expand some of our broadband efforts so there's almost a universal option or close to it. But the other piece is, what if we go even farther? What if we take a look at homeowners who are never going to qualify for a loan? they're never going to qualify for some of the for-profit solar programs and figure out how to alleviate some of their energy costs for the rest of their lives, and see if putting rooftop solar on homes owned by folks in need is a worthwhile investment to our city. And I mean, we'd have to probably put some preference points in there to transgenerational housing, to owning your home outright, to long length of the neighborhood. I mean, there's obviously some catches to it. There's some income thresholds, but giving folks the opportunity to be able to put solar on their homes and reduce their monthly energy costs, I think is a cool idea. Even more, I love the idea of being able to leverage some of this money on these resources to affording the opportunity for neighborhood associations and HOAs to put rooftop on all their homes at once and be paid back through a master meter, or build their own energy site, and they don't have to rely on TEP. Who, remember, TEP they're a decent enough community partner, but at the end of the day, their interests are in their stockholders, and that's okay. That's what that's what for-profit energy does. I mean, I'm not going to hate on the people. They've got great people who work there, but the bottom line is that why aren't we trying to get a cut of that? And now we have some resources where we could kind of jumpstart that. So I know that's a little out of left field. I know that's a little different kind of way of thinking, but I kind of see an opportunity for us to improve the quality of life for our residents and citizens long term, and allowing every homeowner in Tucson an opportunity to have rooftop solar. I think that would be a pretty cool idea, and we could set a little bit of money aside. It wouldn't cost that much to jumpstart. You're talking $5 to $10 grand a residence to qualify, and there's some residences who won't qualify as owner operated, but there's a lot that will. So that's kind of my thought.
Thank you,
Mayor,
Councilmember Cunningham.
Mayor, thank you, Mayor. So Councilmember Cunningham, that's a great thought. We will explore that. I think there's probably two avenues for that we'll explore. One is through our housing efforts and some of the ARP money there. But the other is, you described the opportunity. It almost is a financing opportunity or financing mechanism, because a lot of times, depending on the use of power, there is opportunity to repay based on what the folks would have, basically what they're saving in their utility costs. So we'll explore that. I don't know all the details of the ARP guidance on that, but we certainly can explore that as a part of the overall master effort here. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, my thought is that it doesn't even have to be. It can be on 2 tracks. Those 2 tracks can be hybrid. There can be a yellow track and a blue track and a green track. If you get the whole yellow and blue make green thing. But the point is that the idea is that we've got some resources through the feds, and they're saying infrastructure, and they're saying utilities, and they're saying, hey, and we've got all these housing folks, but we're forgetting housing folks that some of these families need have other bills. One of them is water. Well, we're doing a great job helping them with their water, but let's help them with their energy too. It shouldn't cost $700 a month to cool your house when it's 127 degrees. We got people suffering out there. Let's help them.
Council member, I really like the idea. It could fit under the community reinvestment piece that we had suggested, and rooftop solar and house retrofits for energy efficiency is something that is smiled upon by the Biden administration. And so it's something that we should definitely at least explore. And I agree with Mr. Ortega's assessment that it could also potentially be not just on the $67 million, but also from the housing community development funds that we're receiving for American Rescue Plan dollars. Councilmember Santa Cruz, and then Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to kind of add to the comments that Vice Mayor Lee had about the mental health, that we continue to have our community be devastated by accidental overdose deaths. this past decade, and that it's been even more exacerbated during the pandemic. And so if we can continue to also think about how we support, families and folks in our community dealing with addiction as part of that support, I think it's very much needed, not only for the people who are struggling, but also, with this disease, but also their families. So I think the more education we have around this, the better. I also, just wanted to show, like making sure that we're thinking towards the future around the housing, having housing stability. One of the biggest complaints after, the conditions of our neighborhood roads that we hear from in Ward 1 is about folks experiencing homelessness. And so how do we do a lot of that work as we're thinking about this? But we know that like towards the future and making sure that we're investing in our communities here, that the workforce, development is going to be an important piece, and continuing to invest in our young people and provide them with work opportunities, and so that we can, we can just invest in our community here in Tucson. And I think KidCo, is an important piece of that, as well as our youth employment programs. I know we're currently working with the Tucson ARPA youth in Ward 1, and it's been such a success and such a great way, to connect with our youth in our community. So I would love to see that kind of work expanded. And then lastly, we've had people that have been really negatively impacted by the pandemic, have been, single moms, head of household. And so how are we supporting that essential workforce, the caregivers, caretakers in our community? And just finally, even with, with our small businesses, how are we, I think with the CARE dollars, we've really focused on stopping, the bleed that businesses were feeling. And so now it's so much has shifted around how we do business. And so how are we providing those opportunities for businesses to adapt their technology, the way that they do their books, the way that maybe there's more outdoor, especially for restaurants, more outdoor seating. How are we thinking big picture with a lot of these things? So no, thank you for the opportunity for the discussion, and I look forward to continuing to develop this vision for how we respond.
Thank you, Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I like the idea, the concept. Conservation is critical. Water harvesting, solar energy, stuff that we can do for the future. Protecting our water resources is another critical area. But also nonprofits that are doing cost recovery that have been hurt. People, the organizations like the American Legion, the DAV, the Veterans, VFWs, the Knights of Columbus halls, that are all used to provide a good service for quinceañeras, weddings, and things. They need help now because they weren't able to pay their taxes and they weren't able to fix the roofs or whatever they needed to do. They couldn't hold events. CAT Ministries, People Council on Aging, the Job Path, Project PEP, CPLC, YO, are some of the other programs we need to help. The other thing I'd like to see is a network that we used to have with information referral in the past, where people could call in and talk about mental health services. Having somebody just to talk to somebody who's going through crisis is critical, I think, and it helps. They don't want to call 911. They want to call somebody else and talk to somebody, and I think that's critical, the way we used to have information referral back in the day.
Thank you, Councilmember. I wanted to include a couple of, as you all, submitted your opinions and feedback, the things that I've heard from you all, and kind of, sparked some ideas within myself as well. Mental and behavioral health services is very, very important at this time. We are seeing especially youth, the need in youth, and what the pandemic did to children and youth, as well as adults and seniors. I think we all equally went through a very traumatic event, but there are organizations in Tucson that provide excellent services for behavioral and mental health. And so one of the things that I thought about in terms of relief for families, essential and frontline workers is working with organizations like JTED and many apprenticeship programs out there, as well as what Jeff had mentioned, partnerships with Pima County. Pima County does absolutely fabulous work on adult and youth workforce development programs. I think that one of the areas that I've been thinking about recently a lot is the issue that we find ourselves in as the city of Tucson and as a country in terms of violence, gun violence in our community, the rate of homicides that have gone up exponentially, not just in the city of Tucson, but throughout our country. And in reading information about gun violence and gun violence prevention, I stumbled upon work that has been done by other cities that focus on violence interruption programs. There's definitely zip codes in our city that has much more incidents of gun violence and homicides in our city. And so gun violence, violence interruption programs, as well as investment in youth employment and adult workforce training. So love the conversation and where we are with this. I think that I also heard from you all that we want to make sure that we're serving our houseless community as well. That is something that I heard throughout the last 2 years through our central business district town halls, as well as our budget town halls, that people, even actually our bridge builders, recommended to mayor and council in investing in affordable housing and in neighborhood reinvestment. My thoughts in terms of promoting affordable and stable housing are we have an opportunity for transformative work that is long lasting. So purchasing properties for building affordable housing, including building housing for our homeless and houseless community. Our seniors, there are long lists of people waiting, seniors waiting for to be served in terms of affordable housing. First-time home buyers. I mean, there's so many things that we could potentially do with these federal funds that could really be meaningful work that we can do. So great conversation. I don't know if Councilmember Santa Cruz or Councilmember Fimbres raised their hands up again, but if you have nothing else to include, Liana, Jeff, or Mr. Ortega, I think we can move on to the next item, but bring this particular conversation back to study for mayor and council to continue contributing to the discussion would be great.
Madam Mayor, when will it be brought back? Do you know?
Next meeting, we're going to keep the conversation fresh. So all of your comments will be digested. We will try to reflect them in the presentation. Some of them may not be fully explored, but my intent is to keep the conversation fresh every meeting to make sure that you see the evolution of this ultimately into strategic plan.
I think, Mike, also senior housing is needed for a lot of our seniors, and the other one is foster care, supporting some of this foster care, because there's a lot of resources that are not out there right now. So add those two to your list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fimbres. Any other of my colleagues?
Thank you, Mayor.
Alrighty, thank you. Then we can move on to item 3, which is closely related to the conversation we're just having, but item 3, time has been set aside for continued discussion of the fiscal year 21-22 budget. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is the ongoing discussion about the budget. We presented the tentative budget to you last meeting. Today's agenda contains the final budget. During the regular meeting, you will be asked to go into a special meeting for consideration of the final budget. A couple of quick thoughts for you to consider as you're going through today's discussion. Number one, this budget does include the ARP money as a grant. It does not include specifics on the expense, but we did build it in so that the dollars are available for expenditure. A couple of other big things that you had asked for during the course of the budget discussions. The $14 million for roads, this budget does include that. We were able to fund that from cash carry forward from prior years. So pretty excited about that. We'll work out the details on those going forward, but I just want to make sure that you know that's included. In addition, for the participatory budgeting program, which is specific to this program of the 1.75 million. That's $250,000 allocated to each ward and to the mayor's office. So again, not to bog down the discussion on the detail of that, it's really making sure that you know that those dollars are included. In addition, the allocation of over $33 million in staff salary adjustments to market. So I salute you for doing that. I think that it's been a long time in coming. This budget does show that and include it. One thing that several of you have asked me is what's the impact of a potential state budget hit? I think when Andrew talks about the state and federal legislation, you'll find, at least for now, we don't think there'll be a hit in 22, but I have given you some strategies on the 5-year model. Last thing I'll leave you with before I turn it over to Jeff is, as you remember from the 5-year model, we drained down our cash carry forward by design because, again, I think that it's inefficient use of resource to just have it sitting in the bank, so we're putting it to work. It stabilizes in the 23, 24, 25 year. And so I can confidently tell you that we are structurally balanced in that horizon. I think that's an important piece of this, and it does build in some inflation. It does build in some cost of service increases for staffing, et cetera, going forward. So with that, Mayor, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff for just a brief overview of some of the thoughts and comments, as well as some changes that may have occurred between the initial discussions and today. So Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. As I bring up the presentation, I'm excited to be toward the end of this process. So thank you, Mayor and Council, for your leadership on this as we've gone through the discussion. And we've seen lots of progress, and I think you have seen a lot of the work we've done. So with that in mind, I'm going to just go ahead and hit a couple of the highlights, as Mike mentioned. I do want to kind of put this one thought out there before I get started. This idea, and because of the county's or the city's cash position and how well we've done over the last few years in maintaining that, we're able to leverage that position going forward to provide some really outstanding programming. As we've kind of gone through the adoption process and gone through the tentative adoption and then tonight's final adoption, we were able to leverage that funding not only to do the market increases for our employees, but to get to the $14 million, what will ultimately be about $28 million in neighborhood road improvements, for the participatory budget funding, which we'll talk a little bit about, for a number of things, community service officers, take your pick. And I won't go back all through those. We've seen those quite a few times. But I just want to just applaud the council and mayor in that over the years you put forward that plan, and the work done is coming now to fruition, and that next 5 years will continue that leveraging. So I'm excited about that, and I think that going forward, it's a really good budget strategy. So you see in front of you, you should see our slides. So we want to talk about our engagement report real quick. So what we'll do is we'll provide a fully digested report. We provided some of those engagement notes last time. There's been about 204 engagements, about 46 budgets and or comments. That's about 138 minutes of public comment. So that is a little bit down from prior year, but it's still engagement. So we're looking at that. We're digesting, again, lessons learned from this year. We held different town halls and did different work. So we'll be looking into how do we improve that engagement for next year, and how do we continue to work that process as a year-long strategy And I know this year, Mayor, you took lead on doing the town halls. We've done a couple of ward-specific town halls on budget. We've had lots of opportunity for hearings, presentations. I know we've been talking about this, feels like every month, twice a month. So I think that we've provided a lot of opportunity and a lot of transparency in that process. So I think that's been a good process so far. The first part of the participatory budgeting process. So this is true participatory budgeting. So this is $250,000 for each ward and the mayor. And this is to be allocated how the ward sees fit. To that end, because we don't know what types of projects, you won't be able to find this as a specific line item in the budget, but it is going to be based on the projects requested. So what we'll do, the first step of the first part of that process is to identify the projects. Then we will cobble together the appropriate funding. There are any number of options ranging from the general fund balance to impact fees, anything in between, depending upon where it is, what it is, and how much. So what we would encourage the ward offices to do is to go down the path that they see fit in determining what those projects are. And I know there's various opinions out there, so we're trying to accomplish this through allowing that choice at the ward level. On the project guidelines, we only have a few. We want to ensure that the projects are sustainable, which means we don't create ongoing costs that we don't have a plan for, that they are, then that makes them mostly one-time in nature, or grant-based. So if the project is a grant, we can go about working out the agreements as mentioned earlier and how to do that. And then we want to be sure that the project is achievable. Excuse me. On project timing, once we know what those projects are, we will work with the appropriate department at the city. So if it's, for instance, if you want to do an additional sidewalk or paving project, we'll work with Diane and her staff at DTM to put together a project plan and be sure that we have our cost estimates right and kind of all those components and work through that. And that'll be done in partnership with the ward office. And then again, back to process, whatever process the ward offices choose, we are happy to help facilitate in that. My staff and I and my engagement team, we will we'll help in that process however you see fit. So we really want to just facilitate for you in that process and help to the extent that you would like to have us do that. So that's really the only guidelines we have. Other than that, it's pretty wide open, and that's why we designed it this way, because we wanted to be sure that we were able to meet all those needs, and they're various across the city. So with that, we'll kind of address those as they come up. The next part, and I won't spend too much time because I know you guys have spent a lot of time with Diane and her staff. I believe that as outlined in the memo, that you have all met, I went the wrong way, sorry. That you have all met with Diana and her staff and made already determinations concerning what projects you would like to see done. So I won't go through those, but they're included in the memo. So with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions or take any discussion about the budget you'll be adopting tonight. We just wanted to put a finer point on these two components because we haven't really had a chance to talk about them in detail. So with that, Mike, I turn it back to you. Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jeff. Mayor, the only thing I wanted to mention as a wrap up, I think it's important that we continue the approach that we took during this current fiscal year. So if you remember when we started the current fiscal year, we made a commitment to you and to the public that we would bring back on a monthly basis a full report of where we are. And the intent was to give you full flexibility to go up or down depending on what was happening with the revenues and particularly with the economy because of the pandemic. I think that was a great practice, quite frankly, and I think there's value in us doing that. So we will continue that, at least that's my suggestion, is that we continue that. A full report would be provided to you, mostly on the general fund. At the time, we were worried about both general fund and HERF, but it gives us an opportunity as a team to really identify any areas where we need to make adjustments during the year. And so we would come back to you at the second meeting of every month, just like we've been doing, and give you an update on what revenue projections look like, what the expenditure projections look like, and again, keeps you in real time. So that's all, Mayor. Happy to answer any questions from you or the City Council.
Any questions from my colleagues? This cannot be so.
This is going to be adopted tonight, right, Madam Mayor?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Councilmember Santa Cruz, I do see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and just thank you for that follow-up presentation, Jeff. I know that at the June 8th meeting, discussed the strategy behind the employee retention plan and utilizing vacancy savings to provide funding for the market rate salaries organization-wide through fiscal year 2022. I think it's important for us to have a transparent, realistic, fiscally responsible budget and to allow vacancies to be used and to not just allow vacancies to be used as a bargaining chip. So I would like to offer direction to the city manager to return to mayor and council in September with some guiding principles for how we sweep city vacancies, if that's the direction that we need to go in September, if he could come back to us with an assessment of these vacancies and to get us to a lower and more accurate staffing number based on current trends and projections. I think it's important that we address this issue transparently and acknowledge that there is a give and take, with our retention plan, and without addressing this transparently, I have hesitation. So I want to offer that as a motion for the city manager to come back.
Second.
There's a motion and a second, and any further discussion? Councilmember Fimbres?
This is a question, how much is budgeted for the homeless work program and homeless services? Jeff, Mike, is that it?
Mayor, I don't remember the exact number. Jeff, do you have it handy? I know it's the same number that we had last year. There was no change there. Jeff, do you have the number right offhand?
Actually, Mr. Ortega, I think we wanted to expand the homeless work program, and we gave that direction about a month ago.
Okay, Jeff?
Also the PCHEP funding also, Michael.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Ulick?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the motion, and I agree with the importance of really the budget being about dollars, of course, by department and by line item, and also the staffing, how staff resources, time is allocated, and also in areas we may be historically, as you've noted in the past, Mike, if we've had a certain level of vacancies because we have struggled to fill certain positions, it would offer us an opportunity to look at, are there other ways that we want to approach the work or approach filling the needed talent and positions? TPD is one example. Of course, we're looking at the community safety program more broadly, and in some cases redefining some positions, or looking at how the department interfaces with other departments. And so to me, I think staffing becomes as important really as how we're allocating the dollars. So I just wanted to speak in support of the motion and Councilmember Santa Cruz's sentiments.
I really like the idea of a strategic approach to it and having a well thought out plan to make sure that we look at the entire, just like what we did with the market rate analysis, right? We looked at the entirety of the organization and we said, this is what is fair and this is the step we're going to take. I actually think that doing the same thing with the vacancies, right? Because a lot of the market rate increases are paid with vacancies. So then what's the long-term approach? Because if we start filling the vacancies, it's less investment towards those market rate increases, which, by the way, we want to make sure that we stay on point year by year in terms of comparing our workers to those outside of the city of Tucson, so we remain competitive and we pay our workers well. So I like the long-term approach because we have to look at every department. There might be 20 vacancies at IT, but we might need 40 people to cover that. There might be 100 vacancies at Parks and Recreation, but those jobs are no longer needed. So we really have to do a comprehensive review and have a plan as we move forward. So I really like the idea of studying this. And Mr. Ortega, as well as Jeff, you have your hands up.
Thank you, Mayor, and Councilor Santa Cruz and Councilor Ulick. Absolutely, I think there's a lot of value in having the discussion on a strategic level, keeping in mind that our workforce and our work environment changed radically over the last year. And so one of the things, as I was looking at the vacancy report, which I do on a weekly basis, I noticed that there's a lot of vacancies in certain areas. And a couple of them, quite frankly, you mentioned, Mayor, Parks and Recreation. Well, it's a function of the type of work that we're doing there now in comparison to what we were doing. IT is another one. And so there are vacancies, but those vacancies may not be in the positions that we need. So this is an opportunity. We already are working on that internally. Happy to share that and really get into a fair amount of detail with you on what our staffing levels look like across the board. So it's not just on any one, but you can see how traditionally we've managed vacancies versus what it will look like for the future. I know, Jeff, you have some more information on the homeless work program, so if you could share that with Councilmember Fiembres.
I do, and I apologize. I was having a little bit of trouble getting myself unmuted. We have right now, like Mike said, continuing what we've done last year. In addition, we have 4 FTEs for homeless support outreach, and that's about 530,000, give or take. And that's planned over the next, for the foreseeable future. So it's put in as an ongoing expense. So that's the additional cost that we have in the budget for this year.
And one of the requests that we had put forward as well, and I think we approved unanimously, was the additional 2 days that we wanted to expand the program to. So it's not just capacity in terms of employees, but capacity in terms of expanding the days of the program, right? Am I correct?
Correct. I believe that's correct.
You are correct, Mayor, and we'll make sure that is outlined. The intent, the spirit and intent is what you all had asked, which was, I believe, the additional 2 days of funding for that. So I apologize, I said same level, but I believe that the amount is increased, and we'll have to just look at it, but we'll make sure that is the spirit and intent of what we've got in the budget.
Alrighty, any other of my colleagues, any other comments or questions? Alrighty, hearing none, there's a motion on the floor, and there's a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all, great conversation. And Mr. Ortega or Jeff, you want to include anything else?
No, Mayor, just thank you. As I mentioned in during tonight's meeting, you will recess the regular meeting. We'll ask that you go into a special meeting for consideration of final budget, and then we'll all stand up and applaud. But then you go back into your regular meeting.
Alrighty, thank you so much. Appreciate it, and appreciate the presentation, Jeff. Alrighty, so we move on to item 4. Item 4, time has been set aside for the discussion of the proposed modifications to the Central Business District and GPLIT policy framework. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and I will be turning this over to Barbara Coffey here in a second. This just is a follow-up to several conversations we've had regarding the CBD, the Central Business District, and the government of property lease excise tax conversations. There are 2 items on the regular agenda tonight for consideration by Mayor and Council. So we are not looking for any action to come out of this. It's merely a conversation and an opportunity to report on some of the commentary that we heard from you, as well as some of the neighborhood folks. So with that, I'll turn it over to Barbara.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, members of council. So this afternoon, we do bring to you for consideration, as the city manager said this evening, the proposed expansion areas for our central business district and modifications to the GPLET policy. This is the result of many months of work and a broad community outreach and engagement process. Recall, we hosted 7 virtual meetings in January with more than 400 attendees. The recorded meetings have been viewed more than 700 times, and a similar number of survey responses were taken. Then we convened a 13-member stakeholder working group in order to do a deeper dive regarding expansion areas and improvements to the use of the GPLET 8-year property tax abatement as a tool for attracting reinvestment to the central business district. The proposed expansion areas and the modifications to the GPLET policy that you see in your agenda backup are the result of the work of the stakeholder group and also subsequent input from mayor and council offices. I have also attended neighborhood association meetings for Flowing Wells, Miracle Manor, Sugar Hill, Keeling, Barrio Blue Moon, and Dunbar Springs. And we have also notified all property owners within the proposed expansion areas by mail of this public meeting to discuss the Central Business District expansion. I'll remind you, this is an opportunity to expand the area of focus for our revitalization efforts. It's important that we have the tools available to us, allowable by state statute, to continue attracting reinvestment in the commercial areas within the district and not let these commercial corridors deteriorate further. As we know, when that happens, it tends to contribute to a decline in surrounding areas and higher crime in those areas. The current Central Business District represents 1.38% of the total city planning area, and the proposed expansion would take it to 2.05%, which is within the allowable 2.5% per state statute. The draft GPLET policy framework is also included in your agenda backup materials, along with the findings of conditions for the proposed expansion areas. Our staff completed a physical survey of these areas, which demonstrates a variety of property maintenance issues and code violations. In addition, crime has increased in these areas by 15.2% since 2013. A majority of the areas proposed for inclusion are also characterized by high percentages of population with income levels below the poverty level, and in some areas as high as 50% of that population. The goal is to attract reinvestment to these areas that allows for bringing jobs and amenities closer to where these populations reside to create a better quality of life for those who live there. In alignment with the shared vision expressed by the community stakeholder group through an extensive engagement process, the intent is to utilize the GPLET 8-year tax abatement incentive to assist with private development, financing, construction, and management of urban and mixed-use development and redevelopment projects within the Central Business District. The goal of this program, then, is to attract projects that will help the city achieve its vision of an equitable, vibrant, sustainable, inclusive, diverse, thriving, and affordable community. And that will be the lens through which we will review any and all applications for the GPLET incentive that come before us. And I want to thank my team in Economic Initiatives, also the ward staff members and the members of the stakeholder groups, and everyone who attended a meeting, reviewed a report, emailed a question, answered a survey, or phoned a friend as we considered the future of this district. It was indeed a community effort. And with that, I'm happy to take questions or comments. Thank you.
Any of my colleagues? Councilmember Ulick.
Thank you, Mayor Romero, and thank you, Barbara, for the work of you and your team. I appreciate the input of the residents throughout Ward 3 who are touched by this effort. And, wanted to note, as you did, Miracle Manor, I know Opascua, and many of our neighborhood partners really helped not only to determine the best areas to include, but also the ones that needed to be excluded for a variety of reasons. And I know that's the balance. I wanted to note that we did receive correspondence from Flowing Wells, and I want to thank Kevin Daly, the neighborhood president, for a good conversation this weekend. A couple of things that we came away noting. One is that there is rightfully a concern about gentrification and whether these projects change and really price out existing residents. And in our report analyzing some of our incentives, there is a note about the loss of affordability that has coincided with some of the areas where we've had economic development incentives. And I know that our plan is to really take a deeper dive on that. Because in some areas in Ward 3 that I'm most familiar with, that loss of affordability is often less tied to projects that have been funded and are crowding out or increasing pricing of properties, and more to do with, quite frankly, the dilapidated housing, the mobile home parks that are in such disrepair that those units are lost in terms of any kind of availability. And so in flowing wells, Kevin and I talked about that being one of the challenges. This map touches a small portion of flowing wells, and I feel comfortable moving forward with the map in that regard. And I know other areas may be discussed as other council members chime in. The other point that I think was brought up in the conversation was, can you help me better understand how we get ongoing reports back that provide full accountability and transparency about the outcomes of particular projects with regard to jobs and affordable units and positive impacts, and quite frankly, negative impacts, and how that is reported, as well as what the enforcement mechanisms are available to us with regard to community benefit agreements.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Ulick. And I appreciate your comments and your participation, your active engagement with the neighborhoods. It has help us educate and explain. We have introduced, and as I think this mayor and council asked us to do, included an audit structure in our GPLET policy going forward. And so we will be coming back within years 3 and 4 to take a look at these projects and determine, have they done what they said they would do? Have they developed in accordance with what they proposed? Did they meet the intent of the community benefits agreement and follow through on those items that will be included? And so that there will be a formality to that occurs. And then you ask what would happen, what are some of the impacts then, or actually what is our procedure if one developer should not have met the intent and followed through, then you would be able to modify your agreement. So these things will be in a contractual agreement. Our city attorney's office will assist us in crafting those as they have in the past, but they will take special note to include items that are called out in our community benefits agreements. And then if those things are not being fulfilled, then you as a mayor and council would be able to shorten the time frame of the policy and revoke the abatement and take action in that manner.
All righty, Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you. Barbara, thank you also. Just to reiterate, our Barrio Viejo, Barrio Santa Rosa, Barrio San Antonio, Barrio Santa Rosa, Rita, South Park, Pueblo Gardens neighborhoods as part of the CBD map?
Those areas that you have called out, Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, we have removed those areas from the proposed expansion.
Okay, thank you. And I'm interested to find out more about the community benefits agreement and how we're going to reuse that as a process to also modify and monitor, also track this issue. And then what happens if there's a project that is both in the CBD and the Sunshine Mile overlay? Which takes precedence?
Great, thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres. So to answer your question about the community benefits agreements and how we will engage, so also in our policy, we have spelled out the requirement for community meetings to discuss this, and our office will take an active role in ensuring that those meetings are hosted, and we will participate to ensure that that the needs of the community are being voiced and listened to, and then enacted upon with the developer in the intent of the development proposal. And then while we may not be a party to that agreement, we will be referencing that agreement in our contracts for the GPLET. So again, they will be intertwined. And again, we will also be focused on ensuring that the ward office is notified if there is a project that would come forward in your respective wards. We would reach out to you immediately for initial conversations, share that opportunity with you to start the process and conversation, and then convene those community meetings around your ward office with participation. And then to answer your question about the Sunshine Mile, my understanding is that you will be, there will be opportunity. There's a portion of the existing central business district that sits within the Sunshine Mile overlay district, and they can be layered upon one another, but they could also be mutually exclusive, right? So one could take advantage of the Sunshine Mile overlay in its project to move forward and not necessarily have a GPLET, but then you have the opportunity, if you are within the central business district, to utilize the GPLET. So we would consider those again if one project were to come forward, and we would take a look at that opportunity on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, my last question is, since affordable housing is a must in our city, how can we encourage some of these GPLATs to lead toward affordable housing in our great city? Because we have 24, 25 GPLATs, but I don't think we have any affordable housing in those projects.
So to date, Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, we have not seen an affordable housing project that has been a GPLET 8-year property tax abatement project for us. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but I think it does. There are a layer of incentives that come into play. Most often you see affordable housing taking advantage of programs like the low-income housing tax credit program and other financing tools. So there are opportunities, however, for us to encourage workforce housing or affordability of housing and find, for instance, mixed income housing projects, and encouraging developers to look at a percentage of units that are assigned at sort of different affordability throughout the project, which creates truly a better environment, a quality environment, because you have a mix of incomes and a mix of opportunities in the same complex. I think those are things that, with your your assistance in terms of even the things that you talked about earlier in this meeting, looking at opportunities to acquire more land and create your own affordable housing projects that our developers coming alongside will see that and want to, again, continue to be part of what we're trying to do in Tucson.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for your efforts. You've done a real good job lately, and you and Michael Ortega have been moving on this thing, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fimbres. Councilmember Santa Cruz?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and Barbara and your team for all your work. I know we started really having these conversations and grappling with these tensions and contradictions for how we address the needs that we have in our community right now around housing and displacement. And how do we, invest in communities in an equitable way and in a just way that have been disinvested from for a long time. So I know that, I like to say that we have to go slow to go fast, and that I really, this road, this journey is far, that we have to come along, with our community as well. So I think that the new Central Business District map and the GPLET policy, the framework are examples of this type of decision making. And I want to thank our community stakeholder group and all of our community members who advised us during this process. And, of course, the Office of Economic Initiatives and the Mayor's Office for embracing, this long community informed process as well. So I'm really, glad to see the labor rights and better accountability, from developers are being worked into this GPLET framework. The framework is a good start, and We also need to continue to see it as a living, document, so that as we try things out, we assess, we continue to receive feedback and make, changes and adjustments as needed. The one thing, city manager, that I want to make sure we don't lose sight of, and so maybe you can come back with some recommendations for us, is that the Central Business District of Bridge Builders had requested or advised us to establish a fund that supports the development of affordable workforce housing or small business assistance in the area where a project is going in. And so I think we still need to work through what this can look like. So I would like that to come back to us of how we can make that work. So I don't know if you need a motion or some direction, or we can, bring it back, whatever you need.
Sure, Mayor, Councilmember Santa Cruz, I don't believe a motion is necessary. I think the first step is to get what you wanted on the boundary, which is the CBD, and then the G-plat. Then we can have further conversation about that. So I'll be working with the staff to develop that, and then we'll bring that back for further consideration and discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Santa Cruz. I just wanted to add my appreciation to Barbara and all of the work that you did to make this process much more community oriented, and Councilmember Santa Cruz for initiating us down this path, because at the end of the day, I think we have a better product because of the community engagement strategy that Barbara and the Economic Initiatives team full-heartedly bought into. We have to recall, we had 7 town halls for the community to participate, give us their input and feedback. We did surveys live, as well as have surveys available for the community that wanted to come in afterwards. We also had community bridge builders that were part of those 7 town halls, and then a bigger stakeholder group to give us additional input about where we needed to go. What I heard in the couple of town halls, virtual town halls that I attended from the community, and then it also came from the bridge builders and the stakeholder group, was that the community is interested in making sure that mayor and council find funding and solutions to build affordable and workforce housing. What I heard is that the community wants to make sure that small and locally owned businesses have a same shot at incentives provided by the city of Tucson. What I heard is that the community wants investments in our neighborhoods, especially those neighborhoods that are highly affected by the incentives that we are providing to developers. And the community wants to be engaged through community benefits agreements that are meaningful to investing in those communities. They also want to make sure that we're providing multilingual opportunities for information sharing and community engagement, as well as seeing worker protections attached to the incentives that we're providing. So after all of the community input and town halls and the bridge builders and the stakeholder group and mayor and council's input into this process, what I see in terms of the policy framework is very good adaptation of that input from the community. So adding the word shall to requiring community benefits agreements, now requiring hiring local contractors, the worker protections that we have into this incentive program is very important. Requirement in terms of language that includes employing local contractors and worker co-ops that respect collective bargaining agreements and pay prevailing wages for their employees and subcontractors as defined by Davis-Bacon. and properly classifying employees as employees rather than independent contractors that will treat them accordingly for the purposes of minimum wage, overtime workers' compensation, insurance coverage, and relevant taxes. That additional language is very, very important. And by the way, this, conversation about collective bargaining agreements and prevailing wages does not preclude, because we're adding it in GPLIT, does not preclude mayor and council from having a separate conversation for additional work on worker protection. So all in all, I think that we want developers and businesses to use GPLIT, but we also want to make sure that we, mayor and council, are representing the interests of our neighborhoods, of our residents, and of our workers. So I think that we are marrying these interests into the policy that we have in front of us today, and I'm happy with the results. Any other of my colleagues? I do see Councilmember Fimbres has hands up. Did you want to add something, Councilmember Fimbres?
No, Mayor, I already said my piece. Thank you. I thought I took it down. There you go.
All righty. Any others? Barbara, do you want to close the item?
Thank you very much, Mayor. I think that everyone has, again, contributed a fair amount of time and energy, and I appreciate the work of you all as mayor and council and all of your teams. Appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will consider this item and have a public hearing on this item later tonight at the regular session. So we move on to item 5. Time has been set aside for discussion of a proposed amendment to the building code requirements for the electric vehicle outlet in new residential construction in planning and development services. Councilmember Ulick, did you want to open up this item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Really, this is continuing the work of my predecessor, Councilmember Durham, with the staff in the Ward 3 office, as well as Planning and Development Services Department. And so I hope that we can move forward. I'm prepared to make a motion, but I'm also looking forward to the input of my colleagues and any questions that arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ulick, and it's been a pleasure working with Ward 3, whether your predecessor, Councilmember Durham, and now you, to be able to bring a well thought out approach. The importance of looking at electric vehicle investment in our city and being able to be prepared as a city of Tucson with the possibility of an American Jobs Plan looming in Congress, and the interest that President Biden has put on an electric vehicle readiness. The importance of passing the electric vehicle roadmap for the city of Tucson was very, very important to be ready, no pun intended, ready for an electric vehicle grid, investment in electric vehicle infrastructure, both on residential and hopefully as we have this conversation, not just in residential construction, but also commercial and multifamily construction. So, and not looking at this particular issue in a case-by-case basis, but having a vision for how we're going to build an electric vehicle grid and how we're going to move into the future based on the vision and the priorities that this mayor and council has been so clear on in terms of climate resiliency and climate adaptation. And this is a big portion of that. So with that, Mr. Manager, if you want to open up, or I see both Dan and Scott at the ready to make a brief presentation to us.
Sure, Mayor, I'll just turn it right over to Scott. Keep in mind, this is on the agenda for tonight as a public hearing, so there's no direction or action needed at this point. Go ahead, Scott.
So good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council. Thanks for having us. This is a big step, so I very much appreciate the opportunity for us to work on it. So we are here to inform you and seek guidance on 2 items. Both items are enabled by the Mayor and Council's electric vehicle roadmap and the climate emergency declaration. The first item is amendments to building code to require new residential construction to be electric vehicle ready. This provides information for tonight's public hearing regarding Tucson's proposed amendments to the International Residential Code. And as proposed, the amendments will require electric vehicle infrastructure in all new 1- and 2-family developments. This includes single-family residential, duplexes, and townhouses. So that is your public hearing tonight. This is a substantial step, as all new development will require the infrastructure to charge a vehicle. The second item, which I do need an authorization on, I apologize for that, is to seek council's authorization to initiate the process to develop electric vehicle charging requirements for commercial and multifamily development. This will require amendments to the National Electric Code and the International Conservation Code, which in turn will trigger amendments to Unified Development Code. Nothing simple about some of this, but council action today will initiate the research, analysis, and stakeholder engagement in public hearings necessary to amend the aforementioned codes. So you're going to take another step. So with me today are Dan Bursick, Principal Planner, who is doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and then Clayton Trevelyan, the city's building official, is also available to answer the technical questions. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to Dan, and thank you very much. Dan.
Thank you. 2 seconds to share my screen and we'll get this going here. Okay. All right. Okay, there we go. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Greetings. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council. I really appreciate allowing us to come and present this to you. As Scott had said, this is really the first step, one of the first steps in the implementation of this electrical vehicle roadmap that was adopted by Mayor and Council on April 20th. If you look at some of the initial steps that kind of came out of this for the immediate portion, it really talked about amending and clarifying city policies for greater EV charging, and then adopting EV readiness ordinances for new development. So we wanted to bring this kind of in front of you just to take another look at it and kind of see that, you know, at what we're doing as we move forward with this. We really appreciate the guidance related to this. So what you'll have in front of you this evening for our public hearing will be an amendment to the building code to require new 1- and 2-family residential constructions to be electric vehicle ready. So what that includes is this came through as a recommendation from the Commission on Climate, Energy, and Sustainability, as well as a recommendation from the Tucson Pima County Joint Code Committee. The reason why the current proposal is in front of you is looking at minimum upfront costs versus the cost to retrofit. So you'll see in your materials, the net cost for EV ready savings, if they were to do it at construction, is $100 versus $1,250 for a homeowner to go through and have to retrofit this. It applies to 1- and 2 family dwellings. It is based code development by the International Code Council, so it'll align with future amendments in other jurisdictions nationally. And it is a requirement for a 40 amp outlet, which is a universal for the majority of electric vehicles currently on the market. Related to that, we wanted to just kind of explain why we chose the 40 amp circuit versus the 50 amp circuit. And Clayton is here. Clayton Trevelyan is also here to answer any additional technical questions, but there really are 2 reasons. One is that most electrical vehicles can charge with a 40 amp circuit. There is a small portion of them that charge with a 50, but the 40 amp charges the majority of electrical vehicles. It's also something related to really the electrical demand of existing residential model plans. So the average electrical demand of existing model plans is 181 amps. What ends up happening is when you add in that 40 amp circuit, 80% can accommodate of those existing model plans the 40 amp circuit. If you bump it up to the 50, it ends up being only 35%. What ends up happening is it goes from the 200 amp circuit to the 400 amp service panel, and it increased the cost significantly. So it's more of a a bit of affordability issue, but also universal kind of universality kind of issue related to that. And that's why it's being recommended, and that's why it was recommended by our Commission on Climate, Energy, and Sustainability, as well as the Tucson-Pima County Joint Code Committee. So that's what's in front of you related to this. It's the 40 amp circuit for all 1 and 2 family residential. And then additionally, from that first piece is relatively easy because it's in new construction for residential, but we're looking at portions of commercial chargers at especially larger developments and what the development costs could be and things of that sort. We're looking at extensive stakeholder outreach to developers, builders, business owners, talking to utilities such as TEP to see, how much of a drain on the grid it could potentially be. And then code amendments as well. So with the previous one, it was just a simple code amendment to the building code. This one would potentially include changes to our Unified Development Code, which is a zoning code, as well as potentially a couple different portions of the building code. We're looking at this with the public engagement, with the analysis and everything as an estimated timeline from 9 to 12 months. And we're seeking kind of input from mayor and council on moving forward with this and direction related to that. So at that, we're happy to take any questions from you, and we really appreciate it.
Alrighty, I know that Councilmember Ulick has, so why don't we put a motion on the floor, Councilmember, and then continue discussion from there?
Thank you. And I know that, again, we'll be addressing the residential portion in the regular session, but I did want to address Scott's point about the commercial and multifamily. So the motion is to direct staff to begin the stakeholder outreach and development of a draft EV-ready ordinance language for new commercial and multifamily developments in the city of Tucson, and further direct staff to ensure that they consult with a broad range of stakeholders, including industry groups, environmental experts in EV technology, as well as advocates for affordable housing, and to return to mayor and council with proposed language in 60 days.
There's a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
I was going to until Karen said 60 days. Is that going to be enough for that outreach?
Scott, you want to comment on that?
Yeah.
I think that'd be enough for a phase 1 outreach. We're going to hear a lot from utilities and development because this is very much complex. So I think I would like to frame that as a check-in on the initial outreach to let you know what we've heard.
Okay.
And we will have identified some problem issues by then, and we'll probably need some additional guidance. This will be a major step for the city of Tucson.
Okay, so why don't I amend the motion to say, rather than saying to return to mayor and council with proposed language within 60 days, return to mayor and council with an update on draft language within 60 days.
Fair enough. Second.
Thank you.
So there's a motion and a second, and I just see hands up, starting with Councilmember Kozachik and then Councilmember Santa Cruz.
Yeah, no, that was exactly where I was going. Karen nailed it, so we're good.
Councilmember Santa Cruz and then Councilmember Fimbres.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mayor, and the Ward 3, office and staff for their work on this, and to the Commission on Climate, Energy, and Sustainability for giving us, direction on how we're going to rise to the challenge. And so I think some of my my comments or my questions are more like, how do we inform and think about unintended consequences in this as we're, trying to do our part as a city. So my first question in the memo that was provided to Mayor and Council, the analysis shows that it typically costs around $200 to include an EV outlet. in the construction of new residential. An outlet, when you have infrastructure in a house, is it requiring like a covered parking or a garage? Is that what is needed to like support the outlet infrastructure? Go ahead, Scott.
So Honorable Mayor and Councilwoman Santa Cruz, what it's requiring is an outlet that is capable of supporting the charging infrastructure for the car. So you'll end up with a specific type of outlet in which you connect your car that can be supported by the electrical panel that's currently in place. So we're not requiring a garage, carport, or anything like that, and that's why the cost is relatively low. I will give you an example of what many of us run into is we tend to use our garage for storage space versus our cars. And so you can, in fact, put this outlet within your garage and then run the extension cord that supports it out to your car. So there's not necessarily a need for any additional infrastructure other than the outlet.
Okay, and then we're asking of this for any new single family build. So if I'm, I just owned, a lot in an existing neighborhood and I'm gonna, build my own house, they're gonna have the same requirement as like the multi-home builder.
Honorable Mayor and Councilwoman Santa Cruz, yes, it will be required of all new single home development. The next step is going after the multifamily, so the apartment complexes and such.
What happens, some of our older neighborhoods have mostly just on-street parking. What happens if there's an empty lot and like everything there is on-street parking, there's no driveway? How are we thinking about?
So those are, Honorable Mayor and Council and Councilwoman Santa Cruz, that is one of the exemptions. If you don't have a place to put your car, we would not understand where to require you to put the outlet.
Okay. And then as we're also, in this process with our ADUs, and then that's coming back to Mayor and Council, if somebody is building an ADU, they required to then also provide parking and include an EV with the build out of an ADU?
If the construction of the ADU triggers additional parking, then yes, we would require the infrastructure for EV. If it doesn't trigger the additional parking, again, we're back to, we don't know where you're going to put the vehicle, so we don't know where to require the EV charger.
So what would trigger the additional parking?
So I'm going to let Dan Bursick answer that one because he is my parking expert.
Councilmember Santa Cruz. So ultimately, we still have the proposal for it. We're, as of now, and we're presenting to our Planning Commission next week. It would be one parking requirement, but then there are reductions for being close to transit, being close to a bike boulevard, on-street parking, that type of thing. And those would not trigger the requirement.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just kind of thinking through this. I know that the idea is that a lot of these homes are going to outlive us, but I'm also just kind of trying to think about how the technology continues to evolve. And so just what are the considerations for that? And as we're moving in this direction, how do we, what is the role of asking for new builds to have solar panels as well to kind of support this this needed infrastructure? So I'm just throwing that out there, and thank you all for your work on this.
Honorable Mayor and Council, Councilwoman Santa Cruz. So I think that is a next step that this council needs to talk about on whether they want to incentivize or require solar panels, how they want to approach that. One of the technical issues we'll get into as we move farther into the commercial and multifamily, and in some cases, single family residential, is the impact on the grid. And so when you think of the complexity here, if my house is entirely solar, am I really going to have an impact on the grid? So we need to discuss that. If there is solar on a commercial or a multifamily building, which takes care of a majority of the power, what is the impact on the grid? So these are the things we need to work through right now. So it's a very exciting time. And as regarding the electric vehicle technology, what we're seeing, for example, is as the battery technology advances, and these batteries are capable of taking on more power more quickly, you don't necessarily need a lot more infrastructure because the battery technology is improving. As the range of these vehicles improves, you're going to see the market increase. I think the market changing activity we're about to see, where Ford F-150 is coming out with a completely electric truck that's more powerful, carries more payload, and is faster than the fossil fuel F-150, I think we're about to see a dramatic change in what people drive. So this is an exciting time. What the kind of the code word in the industry is, I think it was futurizing your home. So understanding that there's going to be improvements in technology, how do you allow for the capacity in the house to deal with that? So that's an area we have to explore because we're not quite sure yet either. What is going on right now is we're kind of seeing the inverse. As the battery and car technology gets better, the infrastructure requirements for the homes are actually going down. So it's a very exciting time. Things are changing rapidly, and these are huge steps you're taking now. When we start taking entire sectors of our community and economy off fossil fuel, we are going to start making dramatic changes in carbon impact.
Councilmember Fimbres and then Vice Mayor Lee.
Thank you. Scott, how many electric vehicles are there in Tucson?
At present, we don't have an exact count on that. What we are seeing is kind of an
Hold on, Scott. Somebody is maybe not here, but somebody is
moving things around. They got to mute themselves.
on mute, please, because someone's making extra noise and it's preventing us from hearing Scott. So everyone put yourself on mute, including me, and go ahead, Scott.
Honorable Mayor and Council, Councilman Fimbres, we do not have a tally of how many electric vehicles are in Tucson. What we are seeing is an exponential growth in the market. So if I can get some more accurate numbers on vehicle sales in Southern Arizona, we can come back to you with a number of how many have been sold. So I expect it to continue to increase.
Okay. How would this proposal be a part of the Tucson affordable housing efforts?
So a couple different ways to look at that. One is by requiring it up front, where you get a TEP rebate and the actual cost is $100 to the development of the house. That makes for a very affordable house versus doing the retrofit. The other aspect to this is what we've seen is for our communities that need affordable housing, our communities of color are disproportionately affected by climate change. So anything we can do to reduce our carbon footprint, reduce heat island effects, reduce fossil fuel emissions is eliminating that have and have not disposition.
And what tax credits are available to electric vehicles, car buyers, and what outreach is being done to get electric vehicles to those low-income families?
So there is currently both federal and I believe state tax incentives for electric vehicles. I'll need to come back to you with more clarity on that and a better idea on how we get this notified and out to the broader public.
Okay, thank you.
You betcha.
Vice Mayor Lee.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Surprisingly, my comment is also around technology and how quickly it advances. And I guess my only question is really from a policymaking perspective, if we have 40 amps kind of hard coded into the ordinance, as technology changes or as an individual purchases something that requires are we going to have to continue to open this back up and revisit it every time? Or is there a way to build it so that we're requiring this capability for new homes, but preserving the autonomy for the home buyer to choose the circuit that they want? Because that's kind of what concerns me, is that we're having everybody get the same thing, whereas we're making sure that they have the capability, but giving them some choice in what they get.
So Councilwoman Lee and Honorable Mayor and Council, so the 40 amp captures a majority of the electric vehicles out there. With battery technology improving, you may not need a 50 amp. However, if your desire is to purchase the $80,000 Tesla or the $189,000 Porsche, you can on your own upgrade your electrical circuitry to provide you the faster charging, like an hour or 3 hours, that supports those kind of vehicles. So the requirement that we're providing will end up stimulating a majority of the homes to be electric vehicle ready. If you increase the amperage requirement, you're going to increase the cost of development and start getting into the affordable housing issues that Councilmember Fimbers was after. So you do have a market option to get the charger of your choice to support the vehicle you desire, and then you have the requirement will capture a majority of them.
So yeah, Scott, I wasn't saying to raise the minimum. I'm saying because the 40 amp is sufficient today. But from a policy perspective, as things evolve, 3, 4, 5 years from now, that the market may be completely different. So my question is, from a governance perspective and with this policy, how are we going to keep up with technology and not be a barrier to that is really the question.
Councilwoman Lee and Honorable Mayor and Council, that's a fantastic question, and I will refer back to some action we took regarding lighting, where we had specified a specific type of lighting, and then the technology surpassed it. So if we were to add to the ordinance the 40 amp requirement or best available technology, that will provide the flexibility to up amp the house on your own without coming back and revisiting the code.
That seems like a very acceptable language. Yeah, very good language. Yeah, thank you for the question, Councilmember or Vice Mayor. Any others? I just want to add 2 pieces here. The motion, as I heard it, Councilmember Ulick, is that we make sure that the stakeholder group is diverse, so that we include affordable housing representatives as well as EV technology advocates and environmental experts. So I know that there has been communication with, what is it called, TPC, JCC, about these code changes, but I want to make sure that we are going beyond developers or those that work in the development world, and we add other voices into the decision making as we make, as we put together this policy. I think it's important to make sure that we have those environmental experts in EV technology as well as advocates for affordable housing. The other question that I had is one of the, some recommendations discussed with the PCJCC is that we include a couple of issues that have been talked about for commercial and multifamily, which is minimum standards need to be defined for what qualifies as an acceptable commercial charging station. I had questions about that, as well as zoning incentives will likely be requested to reduce the total number of parking spaces required. Can you elaborate on those 2 issues?
Honorable Mayor and Council, I imagine what people's concerns are is when you get into commercial and multifamily, there may be a tendency to kind of low bid the type of charger you're using. And so I imagine the constituents that are very much pro-electric vehicle and pro-reduction of carbon emissions are hoping for the better quality chargers. So I imagine that's where they're going on that. Reduction in parking. So this is one of those tricky issues, because if we're asking people to do ADUs and do more dense development, they ask for the reduction in parking to accomplish that. And then we've been saying that's great, we'll give you that, provided you're located near transit and providing other mobility options. So they're going to ask for the reductions in parking, which will reduce the amount of available electrical vehicle chargers. But if we do kind of the chemistry right, we should be moving them towards bicycles and buses and other forms of transit. So it's kind of a stew, and I do not have the correct recipe yet. We'll be exploring that as we go through here. Good stuff, though.
Yeah, good conversations ahead of us. But I think we're taking a very important step tonight. With this conversation, I know that we're having a public hearing later tonight in the regular session. So wonderful. Did we vote already on the motion on the floor?
No.
We haven't? Okay. So there's a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those against? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate your working on this, and I'm looking forward to the community discussion on this.
Honorable Mayor and Council, thank you very much. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Clayton, for all your hard work.
Thank you. We move on to item 6. Are there any state and national legislation or regional committee issues for discussion?
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, I have a number of updates for you, both state and federal. First, I'll start with the state. I do have a couple of bills that I've submitted to the clerk's office for distribution to mayor and council, and I'd ask for your consideration and support for the recommendations on those bills. One of those bills, and I'll do that, and then I'll talk about the state budget proposals. So first, the bills. One bill is House Bill 2893. This is actually one of the budget bills. Unfortunately, we were reviewing this bill this morning, and we found a couple of new provisions that have been stuck into this bill that I believe are contrary to mayor and council positions on issues. One provision would extend 1487 type complaints by legislators on cities beyond actions of the mayor and council to rules and regulations that might be administered by city staffers. So insofar as it expands 1487, whereas mayor and council have given direction to try to repeal 1487, that's clearly a move in the wrong direction. There's also some provision in this bill that would make it even harder for civilians to participate in CPARB. And so that's also something that mayor and council have opposed in a different bill already this session. So for those reasons, I recommend opposition and respectfully ask for mayor and council to give direction on the bill.
Madam Mayor, I move to oppose. Move to oppose 2893 House Bill.
Second.
These guys are idiots.
There's a motion and multiple seconds and commentary on top of that. So any additional commentary from my colleagues on the council? Okay, so all those in favor of opposing, what is it, 1387?
2893, Madam, House Bill.
Nothing close. All those in favor of opposing 2893 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. There you go. You have your marching orders, Andrew.
Thank you. And then one other bill, Senate Bill 1241. So this is a bill that I'd categorize as an elections bill that I believe goes contrary to mayor and council positions when it comes to elections bills. This is a bill that had been sitting dormant for months, but suddenly was heard in the House late yesterday and was approved. It's now headed over to the Senate. What the bill would do is right now, if there's a discrepancy in signatures, the signature on a ballot envelope versus what's on the rolls, the county recorder gives an opportunity to the voter to come in and fix that discrepancy or just answer for it. And if they choose to and fix it, the vote counts. If they don't, then the vote doesn't count. What this bill would do is it would say that if a voter does not come in and fix that discrepancy or explain it in any way, then the recorder is required to submit the ballot envelope as well as the signature on file to the Attorney General or the county attorney for criminal investigation. I believe this would give people reason to be concerned about casting their votes for fear of criminal investigation. Therefore, I recommend opposition to the bill.
Madam Mayor, I move we oppose SB 1241.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Alrighty, all those in favor of opposing 1241 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. With that, I'll move on to the state budget. So it's been an interesting day at the legislature today. We've heard that there would be some information made available as well as bills moving to the floor with what might reflect a budget, a proposal that would garner majority support in both the House and the Senate. Earlier today in the House, a number of the majority party legislators were not present physically. They were participating virtually. The Democratic legislators then decided to leave the Capitol, and that caused the lack of a quorum. So they adjourned for the day in the House, and there was no action on any bills or budget bills for that matter today in the House. In the Senate, there has been some activity on budget bills, and there's a number of them, and some of them have been acted upon. The ones that have a significant impact on the city are, of course, the tax omnibus bill. And let me just explain what we believe is in the bill. So where we last left things in the original proposal, the governor and the legislative leadership in both the House and Senate wanted to push a flat tax, a 2.5% single rate for all Arizona tax filers with a 4.5% cap, meaning that no one, no matter their income, would pay more than 4.5%. The cost of that plan in terms of lost revenue to the state would have been $1.9 billion a year. There were at least one House member from the Republican majority and one senator that opposed that plan, and that's why it didn't pass a few weeks ago. There have been some negotiations since then with those members who've opposed the plan, saying that it costs the state too much money. As a result, what it looks like they've alighted upon in terms of a proposal that will get a majority vote in support, instead of it costing the state $1.9 billion, it would now be about $1.3 billion. But it does include revenue triggers. This gets a little complicated, but basically what they'd say is they'd institute some tax cuts right away. That's where the $1.3 billion cost would be. And then if the state hits some revenue targets over the next few years, then additional rates would go down, and they would even start consolidating some of the rates, so that if indeed the state met some revenue targets over the next 3 to 4 fiscal years, they would be able to get to that 2.5% single rate with the 4.5% cap, which would at that point cost the state about $1.8 billion a year. Other provisions that are in this budget proposal, there's about $1.9 billion in debt reduction. This was something that was important to the two Republicans that were originally opposed to the original proposal. It's about $1.9 billion, which would include paying off all of DPS's PSPRS unfunded liability to the tune of about $900 million. They would unmortgage the state buildings, which they took out loans on back in the last recession. That's about $400 million. Altogether, about $1.9 billion. That would free up about $270 million ongoing for the state in future years that they wouldn't have to pay for debt payments each year. There is, as City Manager Ortega alluded to earlier, I'm sorry, is there a question?
Yes. Yeah. Is the $1.3 billion budget hit factored into the $270 billion savings? In other words, is the $1.3 billion net, or is a $1.03 billion net lost?
I don't believe that the debt, that the freed up money from the debt payment is included in the $1.3 billion cost of the tax reduction.
All right, so we're doing good. We've got $1 billion less. Next question. The PSPRS debt, is that solely for DPS and the state PSPRS, or does that include us? Because we have unfunded liability with our PSPRS.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Cunningham, that only deals with DPS's unfunded liability to the PSPRS. It does not affect the city of Tucson or any other participant in the plan.
So, I mean, part of that is, Your Honor, we may be going, look, we can vote properly to oppose this, and I'm good with that. But I'd love to be able to go back to the state and go, hey, you put a little money into the debt reduction for PSPRS to cities and towns, you know, might be worth it. It might net out for us. So I'm not just talking about a different strategy, Andrew. Maybe you can work with our lobbyists on that. Maybe we can end around so we break even here, because the bottom line is at some point, the legislature is going to do what it wants.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to make sure that my colleagues are aware, as well as the community, that this particular flat tax proposal, as Andrew had said, didn't have the majority votes in the House or the Senate, and that there has been a, as Andrew said, there has been a different proposal, as he described it. And part of that proposal also includes revenue replacement for cities and towns. And so as a result, there was a list of, was it 20, Andrew, 20 Arizona cities and towns that are supporting the flat tax proposal. None of the bigger cities in Arizona, not Flagstaff, not Tucson, not Phoenix, or even Tempe, signed on to a letter of support. Sahuarita and Marana were the only towns in our region that signed on to the flat tax proposal. But, you know, cities like Yuma and Mesa and Peoria, as well as cities like El Mirage, signed on to the flat tax proposal. So none of the bigger cities in Arizona signed on. As a matter of fact, I'm very distraught and concerned about the budget hole that this proposal, the flat tax proposal, can cause to the state of Arizona. And instead of investing in Arizonans, the budget fails to sustainably fund our schools and our core services and other needs into the future. And it's short-sighted. And in the long run, it's going to be bad for our economy and the vast majority of Arizona's. And unfortunately, it benefits the wealthiest Arizonans. So I'm absolutely appalled that we're moving in this direction, and all to basically undo the will of the voters of Arizona that approved a tax increase to the wealthiest of Arizonans. So it's just absolutely devastating and flies in the face of what Arizona voters want to see happen, which is an investment in schools. So, Councilmember Fimbres?
Madam Mayor, how many advocacy groups are also standing with us in this? Where's the League of Cities and Towns on this issue?
I have not heard the stance of the League of Cities and Towns, but most of these towns sit on the League of Cities and Towns. I think the League is supportive. I've just heard about, you know, the League of Cities and Towns supporting this. And so, you know, interesting meetings that I have to attend at the League of Cities and Towns, Councilmember Fimbres.
Well, if they support it, Madam Mayor, why are we paying membership to it if it's going to hurt our city?
Good question. I think that that's something that mayor and council have to debate and make the decision together on.
I think next time we should look at how they voted throughout the last couple of years on things that really are controversial and damage the city of Tucson and other cities in our community. See if it's still worth it to be a member of the League of Cities and Towns. It's my opinion.
Councilmember Kozachik?
Is the governor still vetoing all bills that come to his desk pending a agreement on the budget?
So, Honorable Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Kozachik, the legislature has not sent any new bills to the governor because he has said he'll veto any and all bills that come to him unless a budget is approved. So there's no bills to veto at the moment.
All right, so they're just holding on to them. Got it. Thanks.
Sure. And Honorable Mayor, members of the council, just to be clear, you know, it as the mayor alluded to, you know, there are mayors that have been a little more supportive of the direction, you know, the governor and the Republican majority want to go in. There are others that have been opposed. The league has mostly been working on the provision that the mayor mentioned, which is what can be done to protect cities from the cuts that we would see if a full, you know, large tax cut were made and there'd be a cut to state shared revenue. So the league was opposed to the bill. And then with this agreement, where there is this increase in the annual share of state income tax revenues from 15% to 18%, they've moved officially to neutral. So they're not supportive, they're neutral. But they've also, you know, they fully acknowledged that there are mayors that support, mayors that oppose, and, you know, they felt like their specific charge was to work on that funding issue to make sure that they were doing everything they can to protect cities and towns from the serious cuts in revenues and, you know, any types of serious cuts in, you know, core services to city residents. Mayor, with that, there are a few other provisions that I think I just want to mention that Mayor and Council have asked about before that are in or actually taken out of this last budget, proposal that's in front of the legislature now. Just real quick, there's an additional $25 million for state universities, and that's an ongoing additional $25 million. That was added at the request of Senator Boyer, who was one of the Republicans who was not on the budget until the latest agreement. They did take out the low-income housing tax credit proposal. This was in the original budget. It would have provided $4 million in low-income housing tax credits for 4 years, and the tax credits would last for 10 years each. So that is now out of the budget, but it looks like they will have a separate vote on that as a separate bill once they finish the budget. That's been something Mayor and Council have supported in the past. So without additional direction, I will, you know, I'd like to let our delegation know that we would be supportive of the low-income housing tax credits. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is, as many of you know, since the last recession and the move that the state made to collect local sales tax dollars, the state has been charging cities a certain amount every year, an assessment that goes to the Arizona Department of Revenue. And they use that to pay themselves to collect our sales taxes for us. They told us it was temporary when they started assessing the fee. We strongly opposed it, and we've been bringing it up every year with them about when they're going to stop charging us for them doing their own work. Well, this year, I'm happy to announce, or at least as it's part of this proposal, those fees, those charges will now be discontinued. But what's going to happen is those the same amounts that we were paying to ADOR will now go into what they're calling a municipal firefighter cancer reimbursement fund. And that fund will be made available to cities and towns to be able to offset or get reimbursed for some of the costs we incur providing treatment and covering the costs of firefighters that sustain some cancers that are presumed caused in the workplace. So that's a move in the right direction, and we're pleased to see that in the proposal. So those are just some of the provisions that we know about that are in the budget. As the documents continue to come out and the legislature continues to consider them, we'll continue to provide more information to mayor and council and city staff. As we hear more, I would expect more votes in the Senate today and tomorrow. I think the House may not get back till Thursday, so they may not start voting on some of these bills till the end of the week. With that, Mayor, I'll move on unless there are questions, I'll move on real quickly to just some federal updates.
Yes, go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you. So in response to Councilmember Fimbres sent a number of questions on a number of really important issues related to, say, PFAS, housing, infrastructure, postal reform, and I provided those in writing, and I won't go over those now, but I did want to alert Mayor and Council that there's a lot going on in DC as we speak on a number of critical issues for the community, including, the American Jobs Plan, as the Mayor mentioned earlier, and so just want to make sure we're engaged with our federal delegation on those issues, and we'll provide, again, more information as Congress decides how it wants to go about dealing with infrastructure, PFAS, and other important issues. But two updates that I did want to mention that in addition. One is that Mayor and Council have asked in the past about the voting rights bills, and I did want to mention that the Senate bill, the voting bill S1, was put to the floor today by Majority Leader Schumer. It failed 50-50. But what that means is all the Democrats voted to start debate on the bill. All the Republicans voted against it because there is a 60-vote threshold to avoid a filibuster. The bill is not going to be considered by the Senate. It will remain to be seen what the next move by the Democratic majority will be. But I wanted to make sure you had that information. That just happened a couple of hours ago. And then finally, and kind of to bring it full circle from some of the eviction moratorium type discussions that we had this morning, two things. One is there's a group of about 44 House Democrats, U.S. House Democrats, that are asking the CDC to extend the moratorium. We'll see what the CDC does. Again, it was the CDC that put the moratorium in place in the first place. There have been some court challenges. We believe the Supreme Court is going to weigh in on this soon. So we'll know more in the next couple of weeks whether there may be an extension past June 30th. And then finally, I did want to mention an upcoming date that's important. I've mentioned that also part of the American Rescue Plan was the Advanced Child Tax Credit proposal. And this is important because for many American families, what this will do is it will provide a monthly payment. It's kind of an advance of your tax credit for families with children. $3,600 a year for families with children 5 and under, $3,000 a year for every child between the ages of 6 and 17. And so many families will be eligible not to wait till the end of the year to receive the benefit of those tax credits, but as a monthly payment that would be sent to their bank account automatically every month. Those will start July 15th, and I will send Mayor and Council more information so that you can inform residents about how to make sure that if they are eligible for those tax credits, that they are able to access them. As I mentioned before, this is the provision that many federal officials are saying will help decrease child poverty by up to half across the United States. So it's a very important provision, and it can make a big difference to Tucson families. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Andrew, what congressional bills on PFAS, PFOS, or administrative efforts are being done to help those who with health conditions due to the PFAS, PFOS contamination?
Sure. So, Honorable Mayor, members of the Council, again, I've provided some of this in writing, but I do want to highlight just a number of opportunities that are out there currently in Congress that may provide us some either regulatory changes that we're looking for and funding to deal with some of the PFAS issues we're dealing with here in Tucson and across the country. One of those is the PFAS Action Act. And Mayor and Council voted a couple of years ago to support that act. That would provide a number of provisions, including setting a maximum contaminant level for PFAS. It would also provide some funding to help local communities deal with PFAS. We worked with Representative Grijalva to include what's called a reimbursement provision, meaning that if a local community actually already spent money to deal with PFAS, we can get reimbursed. And that provision is in the bill. So we're happy to see that. There may even be some other additions to the bill as it moves forward. So we're happy to see that bill. There's still also the NDAA, the defense bill, and defense spending, where we'd like to see some funding to the military to help pay for PFAS issues that we believe were caused by military operations across the country. There's also opportunities in the infrastructure bill, including a potential $10 billion in the water section of the American Jobs Plan that would be used for PFAS remediation across the country. So those are just some
examples. For health services, Andrew, health services for people that got contaminated and got sick and are now dealing with cancer issues.
Yeah, so there are some bills that look at some of the issues, especially when it comes to firefighters, military folks who may have been exposed. And so, again, I've distributed the list on some of those bills, but again, we're going to continue to fight for all these bills, especially the funding bills, but we want to make sure that the protections that are needed for human health, whether it's past exposure or into the future, that Congress, who, as the mayor has said very clearly, the federal government is responsible and ought to foot the bill for these issues that it's caused. We'll be fighting on all fronts for that kind of funding and support.
And then the other thing with this, I'd like to thank Senator Sinema, Senator Kelly, Congressman Grijalva, Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, and Congressman Halloran for their quick response and the efforts on the PFAS issue. It was really quick, and I would thank Governor Ducey for also the $2 million that he's going to allocate down here. So, Madam Mayor, do we need a letter to thank them? Can we send a letter to them?
I already did. I already called Senator Sinema and Kelly, as well as Representative Grijalva, Kirkpatrick, and O'Halloran for their quick action to help the city of Tucson.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Of course. Alrighty. Anything else, Andrew? Or any other of my colleagues have any questions? Alrighty, hearing none. I think we're great report. Thank you, Andrew. We really appreciate you staying on top of all of this, and keep us posted on the movement over in the state legislature.
Will do. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Alrighty, we move on to item 7. Does anyone have any items to remove from consent agenda or any other items in the regular session? Mr. Rank.
Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I just, let's switch over our announcement on 2 of the items on consent. So consent item G, which relates to the reallocation of funds from the Ward 5 office. The resolution only referenced booster seats and car seats as the type of safety equipment that could be purchased. But the intent was also to include other types of safety equipment, including bike helmets. So I wanted to make that announcement here so that we don't have to pull it off to make that announcement during consent. We will revise the resolution to include that type of safety equipment as well as an eligible expenditure. And then secondly, for the comp plan item, which is item E, it has certain attachments that are the schedules for different types of employees. You notice that we added an agenda item for the magistrate salaries adjustments, and assuming that the magistrate salary adjustment is approved on tonight's agenda, what we will do is we will also update the associated Schedule A under the comp plan to correct the magistrate salary and the other salaries that are indexed to that salary. So the presiding magistrate and the magistrate pro tem. So with that read into the record, we won't have to pull them off consent in order to make those changes tonight.
Alrighty, thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Of course. Any others?
Item D had some errors in the memo that were inconsistent with the IGA. Mike, do you need to read a correction into the record for that, or would you do that later?
Council Member Kozaczyk, thank you for that. Yes, the IGA as attached was correct, and it uses the correct numbers, but it didn't match up with the mayor and council communication. So I can read that correction to the mayor and council communication just at the beginning of the announcement of the consent items.
Alrighty, thank you. Vice Mayor Lee and then Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Mayor. Question for Mr. Rankin, just wanting to follow up on the EV conversation we had and just confirm that that minor language that we talked about, is that going to be included tonight where we're giving people, oh, go ahead. I see you shaking your head. You know where I'm going.
I do. Thank you, Vice Mayor. In fact, Scott Clark and I have been messaging each other, trying to come up with the language. So it will be ready by the time we hit that item.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Fimbres, did you have your hand up, or was a previous?
I just wanted to thank Michael for putting that stuff in the consent so we don't have to deal with it, pulling it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Any others, Mr. Rankin?
No others, Mayor.
Thank you. Alrighty, we move on to item 8. Does anyone have any future agendas to report today? Hearing none, study session is adjourned. The regular session begins at 5:30 sharp. The next meeting will be Tuesday, July 7th. Same time, same place, hopefully. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you at 5:30. Thank you.